week 7 of the fantasy football season, and here's the top 36 receivers I'm ranking this week. The first guy, Tyreek Hill, Miami Dolphins. So Tyreek Hill, I thought coming into the season, the numbers would go down, going from Patrick Mahomes to Tua Tagovailoa or Teddy Bridgewater over there in Miami. But so far this year, he's been one of the best wide receivers in all fantasy football. And this week here, he's got a very good matchup versus the Pittsburgh Steelers with all the bye weeks, obviously, and some injuries at the receiver position. I got him in number 1 this week. He's putting up easily over 100 yards per game over the last few weeks here. And you can't go wrong with Hill. One deep ball and a couple small plays makes a big day for him. Number 2, Devonte Adams of the Las Vegas Raiders. So Devonte Adams, last we saw him, he scored 2 touchdowns in that ball game versus the Chiefs and then knocked the cameraman over. But as long as he's playing and as long as he's on the field each and every week, he's a top 5, top 10 receiver at worst. But this week here with a great matchup versus the Houston Texans in Vegas at home, I think he has a monster ball game, and I got him at 2. Number 3, Jamar Chase of the Cincinnati Bengals. So Jamar Chase finally with the breakout ball game in week 6 at the New Orleans Saints, going over 100 yards with 2 touchdowns in that one. And this week here, Cincinnati back at home. Another great matchup versus a weak secondary in the Atlanta Falcons. And I wouldn't be surprised if Chase puts up that big type of game once again. Number 4, Chris Godwin of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So Chris Godwin, over the last few weeks, he's been getting healthy now for this Buc team. He's playing more snaps. He's seen a lot of targets, especially over the last 2 weeks. 18 targets in that time for Chris Godwin. And Tom Brady likes him as that possession receiver and that guy on quick bubble routes and quick slants. So this week here, great matchup with the Carolina Panthers that really can't stop anybody. Godwin and Brady, I think, have a better rapport right now than him and Mike Evans. And this week here, I think the best game of the season for Godwin. And I got him at 4. Number 5, Amon St. Brown of the Detroit Lions. I know he has a tough matchup on paper at the Dallas Cowboys, but he's a dynamic wide receiver. Already one of the best in the league going back to last season in week 10, week 11, where he really started getting things going. So I know he was banged up a couple weeks ago, but he's back in the mix here with St. Brown, and I think he has a good ball game at Dallas. This possibly could be a mini shootout, or it could be a lot of garbage time where they're chasing points, but one way or another, as long as he's healthy, this guy's a top flight receiver. And I got him at 5. Number 6, CeeDee Lamb of the Dallas Cowboys. So CeeDee Lamb, he's been playing decent football, but now with Dak Prescott back at quarterback, I think he could take the next level once again as Lamb. And he's got an amazing matchup on paper versus the Detroit Lions. They get shredded through the air. We've seen wide receivers go off versus the Lions many times this season. We saw Justin Jefferson have a big game. We saw Metcalf and Lockett have big games versus this Lion team. And I think CeeDee Lamb with Dak back in the mix and the Cowboys back at home after a 2-game road trip, he has a big one. And I got him at 6. Number 7, Debo Samuel of the San Francisco 49ers. So Debo, so far this season, it's been a pretty solid year, but he really hasn't had that monster crazy fantasy day where he went over 30, 40 fantasy points. But this week in a game where they might be chasing points or trying to keep up drive for drive on the scoreboard with the Kansas City Chiefs, this secondary is beatable. We saw last week Stephon Diggs and Gabe Davis have big ball games, and I think Debo Samuel could have one of his better games this week. And I got him at 7. Number 8, Michael Pittman Jr. of the Indianapolis Colts. So last week he finally came out with a huge ball game, Pittman, going over 130 yards in that one, in that good victory versus the Jacksonville Jaguars. So this week here they visit the Tennessee Titans, a Titan team they versed earlier in the season. But right now this offense is starting to get things going. Matt Ryan, he's starting to know what guys he wants to work with and what guys make it work. And Michael Pittman and Alec Pierce over the last couple weeks here have started to get things going. And this Colt team's actually won 2 ball games in a row after getting off to the slow start the first 3 weeks of the season. So a lot of owners drafted Pittman 2nd, 3rd round in most fantasy leagues, and hopefully he keeps up the production. And I think in a pretty decent matchup here in week 7 at Tennessee, he could have a good one. Number 9, DK Metcalf of the Seattle Seahawks. And Metcalf last week, he had a down ball game, no doubt about it, with only 5.40 fantasy points in PPR leagues. But we know Metcalf's a matchup nightmare. And this week here, he's got a good matchup with the Los Angeles Chargers. And it's another indoor game, which is always a plus. No doubt about it here. And this Chargers secondary is definitely leaky. I know they held down the Broncos offense the whole second half of that ball game, but that's not saying much. Geno Smith's been playing good football. And DK Metcalf, he's a good wide receiver. So just after a down week, I think he comes back with a big week this week. And I got him in 9. Number 10, Mike Evans of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So Mike Evans, he's only had that one blow-up game over 30 fantasy points so far this season. And I just feel like he's not getting targeted enough over here in Tampa Bay. But that could change quickly in one ball game here at the Carolina Panthers. That stopped nobody. And you know this Buc team's going to have a chip on their shoulder after losing a ball game where they were heavy favorites last week at the Steelers. So right now I think they go into Carolina, take care of business. And I wouldn't be surprised in this one if Mike Evans finally breaks out again with over 100 yards and at least a touchdown in this one. Number 11, Jalen Waddle of the Miami Dolphins. So the Dolphins, the last few weeks, they've been going back and forth with quarterbacks after Tua went down with the concussion. Then Bridgewater came in, he got a concussion. Thompson came in, then he hurt his hand. Then Bridgewater again last week, but now Tua is back. But we'll see what Tua does here. I'm not going to go out there and say Tua's 100% and ready to go. One bad hit could put him on the shelf for good. But anyway, Jalen Waddle last week after two poor performances in week 4 and 5 with under 6 fantasy points in both games. One off last week for 6 catches, 129 yards. So right now with Tua back in the lineup, I still think it gives Waddle and Hill the best chances to maximize their fantasy value. And this week here versus a beatable Pittsburgh secondary, I got Waddle as 11. Number 12, Tyler Lockett of the Seattle Seahawks. So like I said with Metcalf, both these guys had a down week last week. But right here, this Charger defense is leaky. And Geno Smith, he knows where to get the ball to these guys, believe it or not, this season here. So Tyler Lockett, I think this week bounces back. We know he's a deep ball threat. We know he can run the route tree. And here versus a mediocre Chargers secondary, I think Lockett gets on track in this one. And I got him at 12. Number 13, T. Higgins of the Cincinnati Bengals. So T. Higgins, a lot of ball games this season where he would play, get banged up, and then somehow next week still playing. He didn't miss a game at all this season. So T. Higgins last week so far coming out into week 7 here. No additional news on another injury or re-aggravating the injuries he had. So right here, good matchup versus the Falcons. They get torched through the air this season. And T. Higgins is a good wide receiver. He's had some monster games this year. Jamar Chase took the workload last week with the big ball game. But Higgins this week I got as a low-end 1, high 2 wide receiver at 13. 14, Mike Williams of the Los Angeles Chargers. So Mike Williams last week, a fluky ball game where he only had 3 fantasy points in PPR leagues. But this week here, Seattle secondary don't stop anyone. And I could see Mike Williams have a big ball game in this one, especially if Keenan Allen comes back. He'll open the whole field up for Mike Williams. And other players on the team like Gerald Everett will get more targets, I think. And even Jordan Palmer is a flex guy. But anyway, Mike Williams coming off a bad week, and we've seen it throughout his career. There's weeks he goes for 150 yards, 2 touchdowns, and then weeks like last week where he does minimum and gets 3-4 fantasy points. So this week here, I got him at 14. Seattle secondary is very beatable, and he'll get back on track. Number 15, Christian Kirk of the Jacksonville Jaguars. So Christian Kirk, it's been up and down so far this season. The first 3 weeks of the season, this whole Jacksonville team played great football. In the last few weeks, everyone's production has went down. I know Kirk scored a touchdown last week, but if he didn't have that touchdown, he only had 3 or 4 fantasy points, finishing the day with 10-5-0. But this Giant defense is playing good football this season. But I think Christian Kirk here, Jacksonville back home, can get things going once again. And this guy, he's a number 2 wide receiver pretty much every week. He's getting the targets. He's just got to get the production back up there. Number 16, Chris Olave of the New Orleans Saints. So Chris Olave 100% and ready to go off the injury report heading into Thursday Night Football at Arizona. And this one, I don't have Michael Thomas on the list because most likely he's not going to play. He didn't practice all week so far. And right now it's Chris Olave's time, I believe, over here in New Orleans. He's a talented wide receiver. Only in year 1, obviously. He's making plays. He could get the jump ball. He could run the routes. And this guy's like a true number 1. I know Dalton or Winston, one of these guys will be starting this week, and I don't like them as starting options. But Chris Olave can make plays with any quarterback, I believe, here. And in a ball game where they're probably going to be chasing points at Arizona indoors on the fast track, I like Olave as a number 2 receiver this week, and I got him at 16. Number 17, Keenan Allen of the Los Angeles Chargers. So we haven't seen Keenan Allen since week 1 with the hamstring injury, and him out of the lineup is definitely hurting Justin Herbert's fantasy numbers as well, obviously. But now if Allen could come back healthy versus a weak Seattle secondary, I think he could have a monster ball game out the rip. And I've been waiting for Allen in 2 leagues to come back where I could use him desperately. So Keenan, he's been out 5-6 weeks already here. I think they wanted him to be 100% before he came back. And he took a lot of time to get back on the field if he does. I know he warmed up before week 6, so right now everything is progress of him returning here in week 7 for Keenan Allen. And hopefully he don't re-aggravate it and he puts up the numbers we know he could, but I'm being cautious with him at 17. Number 18, Allen Lazard of the Green Bay Packers. So right here, the Packers have found their number 1 wide receiver this year. Even though it's not saying much, this passing game's gone way down with Devonte Adams traded to the Raiders. And Aaron Rodgers, the most he's doing is 20 fantasy points per week in PPR league. So right here, Allen Lazard, good matchup though at the Washington Commanders. That we know their secondary's weak. We know they can't stop anyone. And if it's a game that Aaron Rodgers is finally going to turn things around and break out, it's got to be this week. The Jets and Giants he lost to the last couple weeks. And this Packer team, they got to get on the right track. And I think Lazard in this one could go for 100 and a touch possibly. Number 19, DeAndre Hopkins of the Arizona Cardinals. So Hopkins back in the mix after getting suspended the first 6 weeks of the season. So D-Hop, we know he's a top talent. Believe it or not, last season I thought his numbers were taking a hit and he was declining a little bit. But now Hollywood Brown's gone and they're going to lean on him more. I know they traded for Robbie Anderson, but Hopkins is going to be the number 1 guy over there in the offense once again. Rondé Moore, I like him as well. But Hopkins this week as a number 2 wide receiver, why not in a return game versus a mediocre Saints secondary with probably Tyrann Mathieu not playing in this one. Number 20, Courtland Sutton of the Denver Broncos. If you want to talk about a bright spot, he's the only bright spot on this Bronco offense right now. Russell Wilson's all banged up. He's not getting the job done, but at least he's getting the ball to Courtland Sutton. And he's been a solid number 2 wide receiver all season for fantasy owners. But this week here, Sauce Gardner will probably be on him. And that's a good matchup. We'll see what the rookie Gardner could do versus a vet like Courtland Sutton. So this Jet defense I know has been playing great football, but I can't shy away from Sutton, so I got him at 20. 21, Amari Cooper of the Cleveland Browns. So Cooper, surprisingly, this year is having a better year with the Browns than he did all last season with Dak Prescott and the Dallas Cowboys. And Cooper, though, the only thing with him, the Achilles heel, has been road games throughout his career, especially the last few years with Dallas, and even this year. But last week, 4 catches, 44 yards, and a touchdown versus New England saved his fantasy day was Amari Cooper. But Baltimore secondary gives up the second most fantasy points to wide receivers on the season. And this ball game, we know it's going to be a grinded out game between 2 division rivals in this one. So Cooper is a number 2 wide receiver. I think is decent this week, but also a borderline type of play if you got better options. Number 22, Brandon Cooks of the Houston Texans. So talk about a guy struggling and not doing much this season here. Brandon Cooks has done it, and it's not all his fault. Davis Mills, he just can't get that ball to his wide receivers in Brandon Cooks and Nico Collins. But this week here, it's a beatable matchup at the Las Vegas Raiders, and it's also a ball game where they might be chasing points or keeping up on the scoreboard. In this one is the Houston Texans. So Brandon Cooks, I'm going to have him as a borderline number 2 this week, one more week. And if you don't get the job after this, he's a guy you pretty much might have to bench the next few weeks here, even with buys. 23, Deontay Johnson of the Pittsburgh Steelers. So Deontay Johnson, we know he's a possession receiver. We know he's not a deep ball guy and a huge playmaker, but a guy who's going to catch a lot of balls, 5-6 balls a game at least. And that's just about yard after catch here for Deontay Johnson. And this week here at the Miami Dolphins on Sunday Night Football, I think he can make a few plays. I think he could be a number 2 wide receiver that can be good for your fantasy team. And he's due, Deontay Johnson. We saw it the last few years where he had 25, 30-point fantasy games. But this year, that hasn't come to fruition. But Mitchell Trubisky and him have a better rapport, I believe. And with Kenny Pickett in the concussion protocol right now, I think Mitch Trubisky is a better option for Deontay's fantasy value this week. Number 24, Juju Smith-Schuster, the former Pittsburgh Steeler, now with the Kansas City Chiefs, finally broke out last week with over 100 yards and a touchdown. He was getting targets. Patrick Mahomes was starting to rely on him and be comfortable throwing him to the football. So it took 5-6 weeks here, but Juju now looks like he might be on the right track with this Kansas City team here, and he still has that breakaway speed. He still has good route running ability here. And this week here in the matchup, I know it's a tough one in San Francisco, but I still think Juju could put up 3 numbers at the wide receiver position. And with all the bye weeks and stuff like that, you just got to roll with him, I think, after coming off a big week last week. And I got him 24, 25. Rondé Moore of the Arizona Cardinals. So Moore here, we thought he would have been the odd man out a little bit with Hopkins coming back. But with the news, Hollywood Brown's out 6-7 weeks here with an injury. Moore, he's going to get a lot of snaps as Moore. He's going to get a lot of targets, I believe. I know Robbie Anderson's in town, but I think Moore is a younger and better version of Robbie Anderson this time of their career. And Kyler Murray trusts him. We've seen it the last couple weeks here since he returned from injury is Moore. And I like him this week versus a beatable Saints secondary at 25 as a low-end number 2 flex option. 26, Brandon Ayuk of the San Francisco 49ers. So Brandon Ayuk finally had his breakout game last week versus the Atlanta Falcons with 2 touchdowns in that one. And Jimmy Garoppolo obviously was always the best option, I believe, for the San Francisco 49er offense. And Brandon Ayuk finally came through with a big game. The last couple seasons since his rookie year, he's really struggled. But last week to put up 28 fantasy points in PPR leagues was a huge one for the 8 catches, 83 yards, and 2 touchdowns on 11 targets. And last week, yes, they did chase points with San Francisco, down 14-0 early. And this week here versus Kansas City, I think we could see more of the same. And the Chiefs do give up the 5th most fantasy points to wide receivers on the season. So as a flex option, low-end 2 receiver, I think he's decent this week. 27, Alec Pierce of the Indianapolis Colts. And Matt Ryan, he's had trust in Alec Pierce over the last few weeks, and 3 games in a row now with double-digit fantasy points, including last week, winning the ball game week with a game-winning touchdown with a few seconds left. Ryan hitting Alec Pierce down the sideline. So Alec Pierce, we know he's a rookie. We know he's got some talent. Then it took him a few weeks to get going, and Matt Ryan to get used to this offense. But Ryan, he's swinging the ball, 60 pass attempts last week here. And this week at Tennessee, another division matchup. We'll see if Jonathan Taylor plays or not. But I still think they're going to throw the rock at least 35, 40 times in this one. And I got Alec Pierce at 27, 28, Jacoby Myers of the New England Patriots. So Jacoby Myers, each and every week, he's been a number 3 wide receiver at worst, putting up double-digit fantasy points over the last month of the season. So this week here, pretty decent matchup on Monday Night Football versus the Chicago Bears. We'll see if it's Bailey Zappi or Mac Jones. But either way, Jacoby's the number 1 wide receiver. He's a pretty good playmaker. And I like what I'm seeing from this Patriot team. It took them a few weeks to get on track here, but now they got the running game going. They got the play action going, which helps Jacoby Myers, and they're playing at a high level. So this week here, Myers is a guy in your number 2 spot, or flex is a good play at 28, 29. Terry McLaurin of the Washington Commanders. It's been a down year for McLaurin. Now Carson Wentz is out 4 to 6 weeks with the finger injury here. And maybe going to Taylor Heineke can help Terry McLaurin. To be honest, you can't get any worse than where you drafted him and the numbers he was putting up. He was going 3rd, 4th round in most fantasy leagues here was Terry McLaurin. But now this week here, he's got a matchup versus the Green Bay Packers. I know their defense has been pretty solid this season here, but they're definitely beatable. The Giants beat them a couple weeks ago, and the Jets beat them a couple weeks ago. And both those quarterbacks are maybe a little bit better than Taylor Heineke at this point. So right here, I think McLaurin could get back on track a little bit. He's still not a guy I trust. He's a borderline play. If you didn't see the start of sit wide receiver video for every matchup, where you get more insight on wide receivers in every position I did. But anyway, McLaurin this week, I got 29. Number 30, Josh Reynolds of the Detroit Lions. So Lions here got to go to Dallas. It's a ball game where they could be trailing early in this one and have to throw like they've had most of the season. But Josh Reynolds, he's been a good surprise here for this Lion team this season. The last 3 games in a row over double-digit fantasy games here. In my opinion, he's been better than DJ Chark this season. Chark really hasn't done much. And Reynolds, he's got a good rapport with Jared Goff going back to this Los Angeles Ram days. So right now, he can run the routes. He's got that good yard after catch prowess is Josh Reynolds. And as a number 3 wide receiver, or even a low-end 2 this week, I think he's decent. I got him at 30. 31, Rashad Bateman of the Baltimore Ravens. So Harbaugh said Bateman should be back soon, and it could be this week. So right now, I got him on the list this week. Here's Bateman. We know he's got breakaway speed. We know he's the number 1 guy over there with Lamar Jackson and wide receiver. And last week, Duvernay, it was his chance to step up, and he didn't do anything. So Bateman's job's going nowhere. And he's got a decent beatable matchup versus the Cleveland Browns that we saw last week give up 38 points to the Pats. So right here, I got him at 31. 32, Drake London of the Atlanta Falcons. So 3 weeks in a row, it's been a struggle for London. Failed to reach double-digit fantasy points. But this week here at Cincinnati, I think it's a ball game where he gets back on track. And if Drake London is on your trade block, I think it's a perfect time to buy him low, because the ceiling is limitless, in my opinion, here for Drake London. He's a good wide receiver. And the last few weeks, Marcus Mariota, he's been looking to run more with this team. But now with Kyle Pitts back last week, I think this offense is back on track. We saw London have a few big games earlier in the first 3 weeks of the season. And this week here, as a flex option or a third receiver in 3 receiver leagues, I could still think he's viable. And I got him at 32, and he's definitely a buy low candidate as well. 33, another rookie, Romeo Doubs of the Green Bay Packers. So Dobbs came on the scene a few weeks ago versus Tampa Bay with a big ball game. But the last couple weeks, his numbers have gone down, and they've gone down pretty bad with under 7 fantasy points in the last 2 weeks here. So Romeo Doubs is a good matchup with Washington. And if he can't get the job done this week here, he's a guy you probably just have on your bench and you're not going to use him. But this week here, I would play him one more time and see what he does as a borderline option, especially with buys or whatever the case may be here, because this Packer offense, you would hope it breaks at some point and get things going. And if they can't do it this week at Washington, I don't know if these guys are valuable anymore as options. Number 34, Tyler Boyd of the Cincinnati Bengals. So Tyler Boyd, we know he's a great wide receiver and a good slot guy for the Cincinnati Bengal team for many seasons, but obviously he's taken a back seat last 2-3 years with Jamar Chase and T. Higgins drafted over there in Cincinnati. But last week he had a pretty decent ball game with 12 fantasy points, is Tyler Boyd. And this week here versus Atlanta, I think he could have another decent game as a flex option or third wide receiver at 34. 35, Jerry Jeudy, Denver Broncos. So Jerry Jeudy, it's been a down year for him. We haven't seen much out of him besides maybe a couple deep balls he's hit here and there with Russell Wilson. Last week versus the Chargers, he hit him on a nice one down the sidelines. But Jerry Jeudy, it's definitely been a struggle for him, and a lot of people thought this would be his breakout year. But this Denver Bronco team, it's just been a train wreck offensively for them. And Jerry Jeudy this season with only 2 double-digit fantasy games. So this week here, not a great matchup versus the New York Jets, who have been playing great football. And especially the last 3 weeks here, not many people have put up fantasy numbers versus Jet defense. So right here, it is a home game for Denver. But Jerry Jeudy is a borderline option at best. I got this week at 35 and 36th and final wide receiver I'm ranking this week's Wildday Robinson of the New York Giants. So Robinson finally came back to the Giant lineup after being injured since week 1 here. And they need playmakers big time. Kadarius Toney, I don't think he's coming back anytime soon. There's even rumors that he's on the trade block here. And also Kenny Golladay, he's been a waste and a bust of a contract. So right now they were running guys out like Darius Slayton as their number 1, Richie James Jr. a couple weeks, Marcus Johnson. And I think this guy Robinson's a rookie with fresh legs and a better talent than those guys. A running back, wide receiver in college, now a wide receiver obviously. So the Giants could use him in many ways. And he's got a decent matchup at Jacksonville. So if you have a lot of buys and you need to play a third receiver or flex option, I think he's decent this week here. And the Giants, believe it or not, have been doing this without a receiver, 5-1 on the year. So that's a top 36 wide receivers I'm ranking here for week 7 of the fantasy football season.